Hello, welcome along to a brand new episode of Writer's Routine, where this week we're chatting to Jennifer Saint, whose new novel Hera is out right now. It's her fourth retelling of a classic Greek myth, and you can hear why she chose to spend a year with one of the most hated characters in mythology. Also, if these have been told before, but told for centuries, why does Jennifer feel the need to retell them?
So I think that mythology has always served the same purpose in human life. The fact that mythology is still a popular subject, the fact that people still want to learn about it, to study it, to read about it, to write about it, is testament to the fact that it's doing something important in our lives. It's serving a purpose for us. I think that the main function, I guess, of mythology, that what draws us back to it over and over again, is that mythology is really how we make sense of our lives and the world around us.
And you can hear why she finds it hard to get things finished every day.
Yeah, I'm terrible at finishing, honestly. So, because I still find, you might get to the end of the day and having felt like, oh God, all of the creativity is completely drained out of me. And then it's that thing of, well, I've stepped away from it and I've shut down the laptop. And now I know exactly what I should have done, or I know exactly what was wrong with that scene. And I'll have to go back and write it down again.
It's all on the way in a brand new episode of Writer's Routine. Yes, welcome along to the show. My name's Dan, this is Writer's Routine. It's the podcast where we take a look inside an author's working day. I thank you very much for being there, and thank you if you are subscribed to our Substack. It's absolutely free, by the way. The link is in the episode notes wherever you're listening. It's writersroutine.substack.com. It's just a weekly, more or less weekly newsletter, letting you know what's been behind the scenes over here. A little noise and news about future guests that are coming up, random thoughts that happen whenever I come to write them. This week, we're talking about seasonal stories. Where I am in the UK, we are really cracking into spring right now. So we're talking about the books, the novels, whatever it is that you read when you are feeling a season, if that makes sense. Have a read of the Substack, it'll all become clear. This week, we're chatting to Jennifer Saint, who worked for 13 years as an English teacher, and then from somewhere that she can't quite make out, she felt an overwhelming confidence that she could write a novel, not just that it would be a bestseller too. She talks about that moment of clarity, and when she started to figure out that perhaps these dreams were coming true. Her debut was Ariadne, which tells the legend of Theseus and the Minotaur from her perspective. It was a Sunday Times Bestseller, like she'd thought. A Waterstones Book of the Month. It was nominated for Book of the Year there too. Jennifer has also published Elektra and Atalanta. Again, Sunday Times Bestsellers. Her new one is Hera, just released in paperback. Now, Hera is Zeus's brother. Together, they overthrow their tyrannical father, Titan Cronos, and then she becomes confused with thoughts of power and leading, what her story is. Hera is often portrayed as the jealous wife, the wicked stepmother, and Jennifer tells us why the story is still relevant, but what she needed to do to change things, to give it the most impact, and actually whether anything needed to be changed. Talking of changes, you can hear why her routine changes for every book, and we run through the thorough research that something like this needs. Also, again, with changes, we talk about the one thing, a bit of advice, I guess, the one thing that she really thought hard about, which sort of change the pressure that she put on herself. And it sounds quite ridiculous, but it's very simply focusing on a story that your readers will love. How that improves your day-to-day writing dramatically. We get into all of that, and we kick things off, as always, with what Jennifer Saint sees around her in the place where she sits down to write.
So, well, I'm here now in the place where I write, and I will say it's a little bit chaotic. So I have a study in my house, the spare room that I've co-opted, and it's absolutely full of books. So I have multiple bookshelves and also piles of books on the floor. And I have all kinds of good luck charms and trinkets. So I've got the first time that I made it onto the Sunday Times Bestseller list, I have that framed in front of me so I can always see it when I'm writing. I have scented candles. I have a rose quartz crystal. I have a Lego peacock that my children bought me because one of my book covers has a peacock on the front. So it's basically extremely cluttered and full of books, full of notebooks, full of things to do with my writing.
In amongst the clutter, is there an order that at least you can make sense of? You know instantly where to turn?
Yeah, completely. It's only comprehensible to me, but it is very comprehensible to me.
Your books, I feel, and we'll get a bit into this in a second, but there must be quite rigorous planning and research throughout. Is that all over you? Would I see that all around the room? Sorry, so kind of notes and dates and stories and all of that.
Yeah, so to my left, so right next to my desk, that's where I have all of my research books, and that is ever expanding shelves, I've got to say. So all kinds of ancient texts, all kinds of like non-fiction writing around Greek mythology, historical kind of texts, and also books that I pick up at museum exhibitions. So there's, from the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, from the Ashmolean Museum when they did the Labyrinth exhibition. So yeah, you can definitely see I'm never short of a research text to turn to.
As you write more and more of these Greek retellings, are you becoming a bit better at pinpointing what it is that you need to research, I wonder, and you're kind of a bit more streamlined with the amount of books and maybe the types of books that you might need?
So I think actually it's kind of gone the other way. I think when I started out with my first book, Ariadne, I had a more limited pool of resources to draw on. And actually, I was also writing a lot of that book in the pandemic. So traveling to Athens or even going to a museum in the UK was not an option at that point. And so I found that I think this is the case with probably any academic field, anything that you study, that the more you learn, the more you realise how much else there is still to learn. The field just gets wider and wider all the time. So I am constantly finding new recommendations of great books that I need to read, great resources, whether kind of artistic, archaeological or literary. So actually my research tends to get more sprawling every time.
That's the research. If I were to sit there when you're in the middle of writing something, would I see a lot of structural stuff around you, kind of post-it notes, that kind of fuss?
Yeah, so I always have a notebook at my side, so I will write most of my drafts. I will write on a laptop, but I always have a notebook, and that's where I do all of my planning, all of my thinking. That's where I make all of my notes. So I will usually have a big pile of books with lots of little sticky labels sticking out of them, a notebook with all of my thoughts. I don't know whether I'd call it a lot of structure, but definitely everything that I know that I want to include, and all these little reminders to myself, and then my laptop in the middle of it all.
I often speak to writers who perhaps are working on a piece of fiction and they like to have visual cues around them, so they might scour the internet for perhaps someone who looks like the character they imagine. With the type of stuff you're writing, do visual cues help at all? Like pictures of specific places around Athens, maybe images of statues, something like that?
Yeah, definitely. So the book that I'm writing at the moment, quite a lot of it actually is set in Cyprus. And I went to Cyprus last year when I was doing the research. So I've got all of my own photos that I took of the relevant places and relevant sites. And I also like to use ancient artwork, so particularly vase paintings, kind of black figure or red figure vase paintings, because you get so much character and expression in some of those vase paintings that they can really encapsulate a moment of action or a really sort of like decisive moment in a myth that I I kind of can take this still image and then think of all the ways in which I could animate that, all the ways in which I can bring that to life. And that kind of black relief figure traced on the side of a vase can become a living, breathing human character. I wouldn't say that I so much would go and find pictures of people who look like the characters ordinarily, because I prefer to leave a lot of that open to my readers' imaginations. I don't like to describe too much in terms of physical features. I'm kind of, I guess, much more interested in what's going on internally.
What about wildlife around you? So we've seen the assortment of trinkets and memories like that. Is there anything living and breathing, plants or animals, perhaps?
Well, I'm always trying to keep plants alive with varying degrees of success. And unfortunately, no animals in my house. We've got many family members. Well, half the family is allergic to fur. So as much as I would really like to be one of those writers with cats, that I could put on my social media and that could inspire me. No, we don't have any pets. I have just a soft toy cat in here who I call Athena.
Athena. That makes perfect sense, at least. What came first, the soft toy cat, Athena, or you embarking on this own kind of tale of retelling the stories?
So I bought that after I'd written my first novel, Ariadne, and I was looking to see kind of, well, how do writers seem to present themselves? Like, if I'm going to be a proper author, what do I need to have? And I thought, when you go on Instagram, everybody has a cat, and I can't have a real one, so I'll just have to get this substitute.
We get quite technological, a little bit niche. We're into softwares and all of that. So kind of what are you writing on? And do you have any strong font opinions there, Jenny?
So I'm so basic. I write on Microsoft Word. I did get Scrivener and I absolutely have no idea how to operate it. So I gave up on that very, very quickly. So I write on Microsoft Word and I like to type in Garamond ordinarily. And then I will change it to Times New Roman to do the second draft, or the other way around. I think it's really important to switch fonts in between drafts when I do a read through, I like it to be in a different font to the font that I've been writing, because it just helps me to get a little bit more distance from the text.
That's something that I've heard of more recently. How did you discover that was something that really suited the way that you work?
I think it might have been my agent who suggested it to me. I remember that she was very clear on the kind of the importance of reading your work in some kind of different format to how you've written it. So ordinarily now I will actually print off the manuscript. I like to read through it physically. But sometimes it might be that I would put it onto a Kindle and read it electronically, so it feels like an actual book. That can really help, I think, to switch on your critical faculties. And I think that the changing text is just, changing font is just a part of that in sort of trying to trick my brain into thinking this isn't something I've written, to kind of step back from it and apply this different editorial lens to the work.
How instantly did you notice that was really helping you?
Oh, I think the first time I tried it, I realised, yeah, this is very useful. Honestly, I feel like a fraud coming on the Writer's Routine podcast, because I was trying to think to myself, what is my routine? Do I even have one? It's really changed with every book that I've written. I've found that different things work for different books, and I don't know why that is. But I always think it's a little bit like raising children, the same thing, the same techniques, just don't apply the second time around or the third time around or the fourth time around. I've only got 2 children, but I've got 5 books. So I find that will really change. And if I kind of think of the most typical sort of day that I would have when I'm writing, I'm usually an early riser. I definitely find that I function a lot better in the morning than I do later at night. So if I do end up writing late into the night, the morning session would probably be a rewrite of whatever I managed to come up with, because I get decreasingly coherent as the day passes, I would say. So I would like to get up early, sometime between 6 and 7. So I'm up ahead of the family so that I can come downstairs. The house is quiet and empty. I can get a cup of coffee, and I would always start with a read through of, it might just be the last paragraph I wrote. It might be the whole of the last scene. It might be the whole of the last chapter. Whatever I need to shift myself back into that world, back into where it was when I left it off. And depending on whether I am drafting or editing, that will affect how long I spend at my desk in each kind of burst. So I'm up, I've had some coffee, I've read through what I did before, I start writing. I might then need to break off and take my children to school. And then I'll come back and get back into it. And if I'm doing a first draft and I'm really intent on getting to that finish line, on kind of when the priority is getting words down, I will probably stay there until lunchtime. If I'm editing, which I find to be a much more of a task that you do in kind of bursts, there's kind of more of the Pomodoro technique involved in editing. I always think that kind of I'll do it for half an hour and then I'll stop, and then another half an hour and then like a 10-minute break and so on. So it depends kind of which stage of the novel that I'm at. And if I get stuck, which I would say is a fairly regular occurrence, kind of just finding the words aren't coming, or the words are coming, but they're not coming out the way that I wanted them to, then I'll go for a walk, or I'll go for a swim, or maybe to the gym, or maybe I'll just go downstairs and do some stretches. I think just doing something physical throughout the day, kind of periodically, just helps to reset my brain. And I think kind of that's when I can figure out, that's quite often when plot holes will fix themselves, when I start doing something else and I stop looking at the screen or stop looking at the notebook. And that's my day until it's time to go and pick my kids up from school. That I mean, it's very, I guess it's yeah, I treat it like a job because it is my job. So I think, well, I need to be there, and I need to be putting in the hours, and that's what I do. And then after I've picked my kids up, I will usually get back to it. But this is when I start to see diminishing returns as the day gets later.
Yeah, I can imagine. So you're talking about those diminishing returns, and when the kids are back, so when you're kind of in family mode, how, and when you officially say, okay, I'm going to finish for the day, how good are you at finishing for the day? Are stories like these constantly kind of creeping into every other moment that you've got, just taking a little bit of your brain?
Yeah, terrible at finishing, honestly. So, because I'll find, you might get to the end of the day and having felt like, oh God, all of the creativity is completely drained out of me. And then it's that thing of, well, I've stepped away from it and I've shut down the laptop. And now I know exactly what I should have done, or I know exactly what was wrong with that scene. And I'll have to go back and write it down again. I will say my kids are older now. So they are, one of them's in secondary school. So they do occupy themselves when they come home. And that's, I found, because I have been writing now since my youngest was 5 years old, and my routines have really changed, and I have a lot more freedom to actually get on with work, even when they're in the house, just by means of playing forest sounds or ocean sounds in my room, so that I can't hear whatever it is that they're doing.
You say that the routine is changing for every book, just like how you raise a child would naturally change. How much do you kind of consciously realise that? How is it changing? And when you start something new, is there any plan into how you're going to try and battle this every day?
Yeah, so like I said, kind of what I realized when I realized it needs changing, it's because what's worked before doesn't work anymore. So there have been books that I have written where it's been really effective to set myself a word count and to think, right, I'm so when I sit down in the morning, I'm thinking I am not switching off my laptop until I've written 2,000 words or whatever the number is. And there are other books when that does not help me at all, when I just find that actually that pressure feels really restrictive and stops me from being able to actually, it becomes like a battle then, I think, sometimes, rather than a motivational tool. So there are books where it's worked, and there's books where I have to find other ways into it. There are books where I've had a particular scented candle associated with the novel, so I start burning that, and that helps me to shift into the world of that book. And so when I was writing Atalanta, which is about this warrior woman who grows up in the forest, I had a pine-scented candle, like a forest-scented candle, and that really helped kind of like as a sensory trick to get me into the world. So it's, when I think about what is my routine and how does my routine change, I think a lot of it seems to be based around tricking my brain into actually getting on with it. It's kind of finding ways around that initial resistance that comes from probably anxiety, I think. And I don't think that's something that gets better however many books you write, I'm sadly coming to realise. I think in some ways that can intensify and the pressure can get greater and greater. And I think I always think this is why people do things like taking their laptops out to a cafe and kind of writing somewhere else around other people. I just think that doesn't particularly work for me because I find it too distracting. But I think distracting yourself from that voice in your head saying, oh, I don't think this book's going to be very good, that kind of nagging self-doubt, I think that's always the key.
How much do you then think about how it is you work best? If there's a touch of trial and error in, well, having a word count works for me here, using a scented candle worked for me there. Is it like an evolving process that you're actively trying to knuckle down to like allay those anxieties and just to make the whole things easier for yourself?
Yeah, I think so. And it definitely is an evolving one. I think it was Elektra that I was writing where I went swimming almost every day, and I just found that I could only work out what was going to happen next in the book if I was in water. It's not a very watery book, so there wasn't kind of a connection there. But yeah, you really just have to stumble on, I have to stumble on these things that work and these things that don't. And sometimes I think, like kind of just sitting down, looking at a blank screen can be such an intimidating prospect that it's just finding a way around that. And yeah, I think that depending on the book, depending on the mood, that those techniques are always going to evolve.
You say what works and what doesn't. What have you discovered does not help?
Oh, what doesn't help? What doesn't help is trying to edit while drafting at the same time. What doesn't help is letting that critical voice into a first draft. Because I think that I think it was the biggest revelation to me probably through the publishing process is just how different a first draft looks to the final product. I think I'd always had this idea that a writer would sit down and be visited by the muse and then tap out this kind of incredible vision, artistic vision that they've had, and then somebody would kind of come along and spell check it. I thought that was the editorial process. So it was quite a surprise to me with my first novel that in fact structural edits are a complete rewrite of your whole book. You kind of strip it back down to its bare bones and you build it back up again. And so it's really, really unhelpful to be thinking ahead in the process when you're writing a first draft, because I think what I am learning, and I really felt like I'd learned it this time, but let's see if I manage to hold on to that knowledge. I think what I really learn is that sometimes you have got to write in the wrong direction, and sometimes for quite a long time, sometimes for quite a lot of the book, in order to figure out what the right direction is. And I've got a lot less anxious or kind of sentimental or reluctant to just cut large swathes of text when they are not serving me, to kind of get 10,000 words in and just say, no, all of this has to go. But now that I've written those 10,000 words and I know what not to write, that has helped me figure out what to write. And I think if you are trying to interfere with that process too early on, and, you know, from the very first page, thinking with that editorial mindset and that critical voice, then you can really inhibit the process, and you can stop yourself from actually figuring the book out more organically.
You're talking about the editing process, and earlier when you were describing your day, you mentioned that was a moment where you did need concentrated work, then a rest, concentrated work, and then another rest. I've spoken to so many authors who actively love the process of editing, and you almost have to drag them away. Why do you think you find it trickier to really grapple with?
Oh, well, so I actually prefer that. And for me, I find that a much more invigorating process, actually, the editing. I really enjoy the edits because that's when somebody else has come into this world with you, and it's not just kind of you trying to make sense of it by yourself. There's somebody kind of at your side. Your editors had some input and they've given you this scaffolding and these signposts, and suddenly you feel like, yes, this is the process of alchemy. This is where that not so good first draft is going to become something much, much better. So I really enjoy doing it. But I definitely find that it's something where I will work very intensely on it and then step back, because I suppose with the edits, that's when I am not freeing myself to do everything wrong, but that really is when I am trying to make everything right. And I think that I sort of need to pull myself back out of it on quite a regular basis to keep getting that perspective, probably to keep stepping back and going, okay, well, is this scene doing what I need it to do now? Whereas when you're drafting, you might just be letting that scene go where it wants to go and see where it takes you, and then work out what the right approach is. But editing is really, it's that fine-tuning, and it's that actually crafting it the way that it needs to be. So I think that is just better served by coming back to it fresh and not becoming kind of fatigued and tired and not sort of losing, losing that energy.
And how much do you feel you're kind of getting better at doing that, at keeping the energy going through the piece, knowing what works now you're so many books in? Can you feel yourself like just kind of getting it a bit cleaner?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit like it's a little bit similar to what I was saying about research, in that the better I get at it, the more I realise, I suppose, the more ideas I have about how to get things right, and the more tools I have at my disposal. And so I don't know that it's something that gets easier, but I think writing gets more and more rewarding.
I tell you what, I've interviewed a lot of authors doing this, and I've never, ever heard that phrase before. Why does it get more and more rewarding?
Oh, there's so much pressure now to come up with a good explanation of that. So I think, yeah, it becomes more rewarding for me in my experience, I suppose, because I feel bolder to try different things and be a little bit more experimental with my books. And I think as time goes on, I become less self-conscious about what other people are going to think. And so, like, certainly I think when you're, I think this is, we talk about second novel syndrome being a real thing, and it really is difficult. And I feel like second novel syndrome comes along because when your debut goes out into the world, your first book, you realize that you will get all sorts of reactions across the whole spectrum and all kinds of reviews and opinions and comments about what you've done. And that can be so paralyzing for the second book because all of those voices can crowd into the room with you and you can really tie yourself up in knots. And I find particularly writing about mythology, particularly writing about these characters where people will have a view on what this particular god is like or which version of the myth they feel that they prefer, for example. And so you kind of become aware of all the many ways in which you can disappoint people and come up against what it is that they think. And that recedes over time. That was something that really, really got into my head in a way that wasn't helpful in writing Elektra, my second book. But I think is something that I have found a lot more peace with as time goes on. And I realized that you can never write a book that everybody likes, but you can write a book that your readers will love. And that's much more important than trying to achieve the impossible of something that will be kind of universally positively received. And that makes certainly me feel bolder about the choices that I make and more able to say, actually, do you know what? This is the novel I want to write. And I think it's worth writing. So I'm going to do it this way. I have to take the readers out of the equation while I'm actually writing. And it has to be about what story do I want to tell rather than what story do people want to receive. So that was, I think, what stifled me before, thinking too much about what do people want from this, which isn't to say that readers are not very important, but definitely when you're writing, I think this is why it becomes more rewarding. I just feel that I get more and more in touch with my own voice and the things that I want to say, the further that I go.
You spoke about writing into the evening, perhaps, and it's inevitably something that you're going to have to fix the next day because it's nonsense. Do you realise that at the time? Like, if you can tell me now that it's going to be nonsense, when you're writing it at, I don't know, 10 p.m, whenever it is, how much can you feel that it's something that's going to have to be utterly mended?
I mean, probably I can be writing at that time thinking, this is going really well. I don't know why I don't write in the evenings all the time. And it is only the next day that I realise, oh no, that just went wildly off-piste.
Now, this might be me perhaps leaping to things that aren't there. But what's interesting is that you know that you need certain things to write. It's almost a case of tricking your mind into getting to work with the candles and with all of that. Yet you used to be a teacher, right? At a high school. How do you think that you as a teacher would react to the way that you need to get to work now? Like if a student kind of said, well, I don't really fancy working. I need a candle to do it. I'm not, what would you have said?
This is my life with a teenage son, honestly, that he's guilty of all the same things that I am. And he doesn't require a scented candle to work, I will say that. But definitely the coaxing, the tricking, the persuading, I would say comes into it. It's so annoying in another person. We're probably always more triggered by our own kind of bad qualities in other people. So I think it can be really easy to identify that one of my former students perhaps was going about things in a really awkward way and, really giving into procrastination. But it's an entirely different kettle of fish when it comes to yourself. Also, I just think there is something so institutionalizing about being a teacher, because my whole life was dictated by bells, the bells at the start and end of a lesson, and these very defined segments of time in which I had to deliver kind of a certain amount of material or whatever it was, that I think that when I left teaching and became a full-time writer, suddenly that absence of bells and that real collapse of structure in my day, that was probably something that I really have had to adjust to, and that I probably still am adjusting to, because I'd spent basically my entire life in education up until I was 36. So just sort of 6 years into my writing career now, I think I probably still feel the absence of the bells.
Do you enjoy the absence, though? Particularly the absence of structure, of knowing you've got hour by hour slots, that this is when your day will begin. Hopefully, although I know teachers very rarely, this is when your day will end. Do you miss that? Yeah, just that structure with things.
No, I don't miss it at all. I think that there are really helpful things about structure, and there's, sort of lots of ways in which I do try to introduce some structure into my life, because otherwise, things could slide out of control altogether. If you're a writer and you're working from home and there's nobody checking in on you on a daily basis to see what you're achieving, you obviously do need some points of structure in your life. But I really love it. I'll be working mid-morning and I'll look around me and I'll think, well, isn't this just such luxury that nobody's going to ring a bell and make me move on to the next thing, and that I have got the freedom to decide for myself which scene I'm going to work on next, what direction I'm going to take with this. It's really tremendously liberating, and I really love it.
We'll talk about Hera in just a second. I want to take you back just before you were starting to write, or when you were initially writing Ariadne. How much of a grand plan was there, that if it went well, if you could devote yourself to writing full time, that there was, a huge amount of myths that could be retold?
Yeah, I think there is something about deciding that you're going to write a novel. It requires this huge leap of faith, and this you have to have this self-belief. And when I look back, I think I don't completely know where it came from, in all honesty, because writing is such a tricky thing to establish yourself in. It felt like an ambition that so many people have, and that why on earth did I think that I could be the one to achieve it? But in order to actually write that novel, in order to go from the first line to the last line, you really have to believe that it is possible. And I remember, and I hope this doesn't make me sound like an absolute monster. But I remember sitting in the staff room one break time and just saying, I'm going to finish this novel and it's going to be a Sunday Times bestseller. I just know it will be. And I think I'd had possibly a really frustrating morning that morning, and I was kind of visualizing an alternative life and a different career, because we all have those days. But I really remember saying it, and I really remember that something in me believed that would be true, even while all of the rational parts of my brain were saying that is a ridiculous goal to go for. You can have that as a dream, but that can't actually be your goal, because that's so many things about that are out of your control and out of your hands. But it was, and it did actually come to pass that Ariadne was on the Sunday Times bestseller list the week that it was published. And I do remember just that really strange full circle moment of thinking, oh, it actually did happen. I don't know how that was, but it did.
In the lead up to it being published, what signs were there that could be possible? Could you feel kind of the weight of a publisher behind you, the frenzy of marketing all around?
Yeah, so I think that you have a lot of people kind of hopeful about the book. You know, there's this whole team of people who are supportive of it, who are behind it, who are putting so much work into every aspect of the marketing and the promotion and all the rest of it. And so I felt how much everybody wanted it. But the chart is such an ephemeral thing, and there are so few sort of absolute measures, I think, when it comes to writing, because what you really want, what's really important to me, is writing a book that people will connect with, and that, you know, the people who love it will really, really love it, and that book will be to those readers what my favourite books are to me, which is a companion and an inspiration and a comfort. And books make up so much of my life and have, you know, really formed they've been with me through all of the eras of my life, I suppose. So the idea that you can have a book that might be that to somebody else, that's really the goal. But how do you measure that goal? That's not something that you can kind of objectively quantify. I want to write a book that people love. That's more difficult. But you can quantitatively measure the sales, and you can quantitatively measure the chart position. And so I guess that it's very easy to focus in on those aspects as being the kind of, well, here is something that I can say is a definitive marker of success or otherwise. But actually, that top 10, it shifts every week. And so what might get you a number one spot one week might not even get in the top 10 another week. It's a very kind of shifting sands kind of thing to rest all of your hopes on. But it does, I think, assume that incredible importance, because it is something that feels like, oh, okay, that's a real thing.
We're back with more from Jennifer in just a second. Now, if you're enjoying the podcast, there's a few ways that you can help us out, a few things that you can do. As I mentioned at the start, you can subscribe to our Substack. It's a weekly newsletter letting you know what's happening here at Writers Routine HQ. The link is in the episode notes wherever you're listening. You can also pledge to support us over on Patreon. You can become a monthly backer. Just a few dollars a month. It really helps us keep going. It helps me keep bringing you these chats as often as I can. You get merch, there is bonus content. There's access to another little writing community happening over there. I'm fully aware that maybe like a monthly contribution, a commitment like that, isn't the best thing for you, perhaps. If you would like to make a one-off donation, a tip, you can do that on our Ko-Fi page, ko-fi.com/writers routine. Everything that you send comes to me, helps me dedicate the time to do this more or less every week, to chat to the best authors around. Whatever you can send my way over on Patreon or Ko-Fi is very gratefully received, and it goes a long way. You can find out more in the episode notes wherever you're listening. Let's get back to it then. We're chatting to Jennifer Saint about Hera, her new novel retelling a classic tale of Greek mythology. You can hear what she decides is coming next when she figures out what she's writing. How does she map out her own version of the story? Also, we run through why she chose to spend a year with one of the most hated characters in all Greek myths, and we pick things up talking about that process of picking, really. With so many stories that she could tell, how does she decide what the next myth should be?
I'm very immersed, obviously, in the ancient world and in mythology. So I guess it's that idea that feels exciting. So there might be all kinds of myths where I think, yeah, that's interesting, and, you know, that's a good story. Or somebody will say to me, oh, why don't you write this myth? You know, my kids are often quite keen for me to write particular myths that they like, and it just, you know, it doesn't click. And then that idea will come where I just think, oh, that's a good novel. Like, there is a novel there. And what is it that makes me think that one's a novel and that other one isn't, is just, I suppose, the attraction to that idea. I mean, I'm going to have to spend a year of my life with this person. So I better make sure that there's somebody in whose company I think that I'm going to at least find it a really interesting place to be.
So what made you decide that Hera would be that person that you're keen to spend a lot of time in? Describe to us the first moment that you thought, oh, okay, yeah, maybe this is a goer.
Yeah, so Hera, so she's absolutely not somebody that anybody normal would want to spend a year with, I've got to say. She's probably one of the most hated women of Greek mythology, I think, in that, even people who are really excited about uncovering women's stories in mythology and, really championing the female-centered kind of version of mythology. Even those people, I think, recoil a little bit from Hera. She's really difficult to get behind from a feminist perspective because Hera is one of those figures in mythology who takes out a lot of her anger on other women. So she seemed in a lot of ways, kind of seemed initially to me to be antithetical to the kind of heroine, kind of protagonist that I want to write about. But I think the fact that she inspires such strong feelings, that was what made her really interesting to me. That was what made me think there has got to be something here. The fact that she's the wife of Zeus, and Zeus is such a huge character in Greek mythology, and the idea of being married to somebody like that is a fairly monstrous prospect in itself. That made me interested in her. How does she survive? How does she navigate? How does she thrive in that kind of situation? So I wanted to find out more about her. And I think that the great thing about Hera is that you don't have to dig very deep to find much better stories about her than the ones that are more commonly told. You so often hear the same story about Hera, which is that Zeus was having an affair with this mortal woman or this goddess, and Hera came along and she was so jealous and she was so spiteful and she punished the woman, and rinse and repeat 100 times in, slightly different variations. But if you just look a little bit deeper, you find incredible stories about who Hera was. You find out that she's a woman so very much defined by her anger that in my favourite myth about her of all time, she's so very angry, she's so consumed with rage that she just spontaneously becomes pregnant, which is, kind of weird. And the baby that she gives birth to is made of snakes and fire, and he tries to take down Mount Olympus. And I thought, that's an amazing story. Why don't we hear this story about Hera a lot more often? Well, I guess I'm going to have to tell it then. So yeah, it didn't take long for me to find another side of Hera. And of course, that just got me more inflamed to see the need to write about this woman, to bring the other stories about this goddess to the forefront.
So when you've decided this is what you're going to do, this is who you're focusing on, I guess, again, very open-endedly, but it's not quite the same as you having an idea for a completely, something that's never been done before, right? And you have to meticulously plot out everything or kind of fly by the seat of your pants, whatever. You are pulling together all the different myths that you know and working them into something yourself. So I guess when you've got that idea, what's the next step? What do you need to do all over before you actually start writing something?
So I will make a list really of the key myths about this person. So that will be the kind of the headline moments of their life that people will know about. So with Ariadne, the labyrinth is obviously, everybody knows about that one. And with Hera, there was this kind of much wider scope because she's an immortal goddess. So there were lots more key events, kind of key aspects to her life that I wanted to include. So I'll make a list of those. Kind of, here are the things that are the most kind of stand out about this character. And then I'll figure out which of those support the story that I want to tell about this person. So there's a process of selection because there are countless myths and there are countless variations of every myth as well. There's never such a thing as finding the definitive version of any one myth. All myths have been told and retold, and were being told and retold in the ancient world as well as the modern world. So there's a filtering process. And when it came to Hera, that process took me a lot longer because they were just simply, the volume of stories about Hera was immense compared to all of my other protagonists, because they were all mortal women limited to one mortal lifespan. But it's not so much about, I'm going to retell these myths. It's more about which of these myths are going to fit the story that I want to create about this character. So it's kind of coming at it from the opposite direction, really. And that makes the process of choosing which myths I'm going to include and how I'm going to include them. It's actually more straightforward in a way than you'd think, because I'm not sort of trying to pick like X number of myths about this character. I'm trying to pick the myths that are going to create this character's arc, this character's journey, that's going to take them from point A to point B with everything that happens on the way there, to change them and to develop them and to grow them, and for them to learn whatever lesson it is that they're going to learn throughout the course of the novel. And I always think that a more interesting question to ask than what happened in the stories is really, why did it happen? So if I'm going to have a character do something that we recognise from the myths about them, what is going to make it interesting, what's going to make it worthwhile reading my interpretation of that, is why they do that, why they carry out that action. And that gives you really an infinite number of possibilities. When you're asking why rather than what, you can go anywhere you want, and you can go kind of far beyond the realms of the way that the stories have been told before, and you can turn it into something completely different.
Well, just touching on that then, if these stories have been told before in some form, I guess, what's the purpose in you putting your own spin on these? What do you think a reader is taking from the way that you do it?
So I think that mythology has always served the same purpose in human life for so many centuries. You know, the fact that the fact that mythology is still a popular subject, the fact that people still want to learn about it, to study it, to read about it, to write about it, is testament to the fact that it's doing something important in our lives. It's serving a purpose for us. And I think that the main function, I guess, of mythology, that what draws us back to it over and over again, is that mythology is really how we make sense of our lives and the world around us. And that might be, in the most sort of kind of simplistic sense, there can be the myths where you can see they're explaining, you know, a natural phenomena, something about the environment, something where you can say, yeah, okay, people living in the far distant past, maybe they needed an explanation for thunder, and an angry Zeus was the one that made the most sense. So you can kind of simplify it back to those sorts of building blocks. But I think it's always been a lot more complex than that, and that these stories are serving the purpose of helping us make sense of who we are and how we live our lives. And that's not something that ever becomes less relevant. But the way that you tell them is always going to reflect what are the pressing anxieties or the concerns of the time and the culture and the space that you are living in. So that's why there will always be an infinite number of variations upon these stories. But the fact that they have got those key elements that keep them recognizable and keep them familiar, I think is really crucial to them serving that purpose, to them anchoring us in something that we understand and that we recognize. And that enables us, that kind of gives us a platform from which we can ask more questions and we can interrogate them and we can take them to new places and find answers to the questions that we want to ask when we tell them. And I'm always really struck by the fact that we live in a world that always feels so divided and so polarized, kind of, now more than ever in so many ways. But we are telling these same stories, however differently we tell them, whatever it is that we do with them. And there is this chain of connection. I find it really magical to think about, that we might tell a story that somebody told 3,000 years ago and we can still find it relevant and we can still find it exciting or moving or whatever it is to us. And it just reminds me that there is something universal about myth. There is something universal about stories and narrative. And however far apart from other people we can feel, that's something that brings us back together.
Because you are like putting your own spin and working on these stories, how much trickier do you think that helped is the wrong word. What did that do to your ability to find your own writing voice? Again, having spoken to so many authors, I know that that's a really tricky part of it. Some authors don't kind of find the way that they do it and what their voice is for novels down the line. But because these stories have been told in a way before, and quite often with Greek myths in a very particular way before, how much did that influence the discovery of how you write, your style, your voice?
So I'd always tried to write novels before, and never got very far, kind of, like really not very far, not beyond maybe 6 or 7 chapters at most, perhaps. So sort of all through my 20s, I was starting and abandoning these writing projects, and none of them were mythology related. I am a huge fan of writers like Marion Keyes, for example, and I was trying to write novels like she does. I was trying to write commercial women's fiction novels, and it was not working at all. And when I look back, I can see that was an issue of voice, because when I sat down to write Ariadne, which, by the way, was a New Year's resolution. So I actually started writing it on the 1st of January in 2019. When I started writing it, the words came in a way that they had never come before. And I think it was the melding of the two things that I really, really love, which is Greek mythology and writing. And that was my voice. And it wasn't something that I could go and look for, and it wasn't something that I could know what it was in advance. It was something that I heard and that I recognized. And when it was on the page in front of me, I thought, yeah, this is how I should have been writing. And that's just not something that I knew until I started writing, and that voice was there.
And the final question is, how do you deal with the balance of how you're telling them and how the stories have been presented before? Because it's clearly quite a wrangle at times, because you mentioned early on that sometimes the words aren't coming, that you are simply stuck. So how much are you allowing yourself to kind of take these stories in your own way and stay true to the essence, but put your own creativity on them?
Oh, that's such a difficult question because it's something that you negotiate all of the time, I suppose. I think kind of being stuck, that can just be a product of I don't know. Sometimes I think, if I get stuck, it's because I'm making the wrong choice and I'm not going in the direction that the story needs, or that, that I'm going kind of the way that I thought it should go, and actually it's going to be something different. But sometimes you just get stuck because it's hard, and because it's quite often, I think, a product of overthinking. Honestly, I think I am more likely to get stuck when I am thinking too hard about that question, thinking too hard about, am I doing something different enough? Am I doing something exciting or interesting enough? I think when I'm asking that question, that's when I probably will get stuck. And sometimes you just slog through that part and keep writing. And I always think, I can come back and I can rewrite it later. And sometimes when I go back to those sections, sometimes they're the best bits. Sometimes it feels like it's coming out so wrong. And actually it isn't. I think a lot of that is about mindset and is about overthinking. And to some extent, I probably have to ask that question of myself less and trust the process more. And that's actually what results in the best outcome in the end.
And that is it with Jennifer Saint, this week's guest on the podcast. The new novel is Hera. It's just been released in paperback. If you'd like a copy, please do use our bookshop.org page. The link is wherever you're listening. On there, it does cost a little bit more, I'll be honest, but you can be safe in the knowledge that you're helping out Jennifer, this podcast, and your local independent bookshop. It'd be great if you could do that. Also, you can support us on Patreon and Ko-Fi, wherever you're listening, and you can get in touch with the show, writersroutine.com. Subscribe to our Substack newsletter too, just dropped a new one for you today. And I will see you next week with a brand new guest on the podcast. Until then, thanks for listening.